The gallery wall text for my own exhibition listed him as the primary lender of record. My name appeared beneath it in smaller type, under collaboration. I saw it the morning the doors opened, before anyone else arrived. The labels had already been mounted. Changing them would have required tools I didn't have access to anymore. The registrar told me it was too late to reprint before opening night. 3 months earlier, he had walked into my studio carrying a crate I hadn't ordered. He set it down carefully like it was fragile, and said the delivery company couldn't leave it unattended. The crate was addressed to the building, not to me. Inside were lights I'd been trying to source for weeks. He said he knew the supplier. He stayed long enough to help me test them, then left before I asked anything else. That was how he entered my life. By resolving a bottleneck I hadn't mentioned out loud. He started coming by in the afternoons after that. Not to watch me work. To do the things around it. Adjusting sightlines. Noting where visitors would pause. Bringing coffee without interrupting my rhythm. He was younger. Quieter than the people who usually tried to help. He didn't tell me what he thought of the work. He asked where I wanted people to stand. When the curator pulled out 2 weeks before installation, he didn't offer opinions. He offered time. Sat with me while I made calls. Drafted emails I could send or ignore. When I sent them, responses came faster. He didn't take credit for that. We didn't call it anything. He didn't stay over at first. He left when I started prepping canvases for the next day. He remembered which pieces I refused to sell and never asked why. When a collector made an offer directly to him after a walkthrough, he forwarded it without comment and waited for my decision. The first night he stayed was because the freight elevator broke during delivery. We waited together until after midnight. He lay on the floor with his jacket under his head and talked me through the order of hanging so I could sleep. In the morning, he left before the installers arrived. After that, he was there more. Not constantly. Reliably. He handled the things I resented handling. Invoices. Scheduling. Press follow-ups. He never introduced himself as anything specific. People assumed. I didn't correct them. When the lender paperwork came up for the exhibition insurance, he flagged the section I needed to initial. Said it was standard. Temporary. Just to streamline communication while I was in the studio. I signed between brush cleanings. The opening approached fast. He took calls in the hallway. Told me what mattered. Told me what didn't. The registrar asked him to confirm details while I was on a ladder. He did. I slept at the studio the week before. He brought food. Changed light bulbs. Replaced a cracked frame without telling me. When I asked why he was doing so much, he said it was easier this way. For both of us. Opening night, the room filled quickly. I stood near the back and watched people read the wall text. Some nodded toward him. He stayed close but didn't touch me. When someone congratulated him, he redirected the praise toward the work. I didn't see the label until later. When I asked the registrar to fix it, she said she'd need approval from the primary lender. She looked past me when she said it. He found me after the doors closed. Asked if I wanted to eat. I said not yet. He nodded like that was an answer to a different question. The lights stayed on. The labels stayed where they were. After the opening, people treated him like the hinge. Questions landed on him first. Where pieces were going next. Who was underwriting transport. What the timeline looked like after the show closed. He answered carefully, always in a way that looped back to me without fully returning control. We moved through the next weeks as if we were inside a shared task rather than a relationship. He tracked interest. Filtered requests. Declined things I would have declined sometimes before I saw them. When I noticed, he showed me the messages. Not all of them. Enough. He started keeping a ledger. Not for money exactly. For movement. Which collectors lingered. Which press followed up. Which galleries asked questions that sounded like offers. He didn't frame it as strategy. He framed it as memory. Said I shouldn't have to hold all of it. The studio changed shape. Chairs appeared where people tended to stand. A small table near the entrance with catalogs stacked just right. He paid for the first print run without asking. When I tried to reimburse him, he waved it off. Said it was easier to keep it clean for now. We slept together during that stretch, but it didn't feel like a pivot. It felt adjacent. He never stayed late when I had early work. Never stayed when I asked for space. He learned my rhythms and worked around them. When I left for a short residency upstate, he stayed behind to handle follow-ups. Sent me updates I didn't ask for but appreciated. There were things I noticed without registering. Emails addressed to him that I was copied on second. Contracts sent to his inbox first because he responded faster. A wire confirmation that landed in his account before moving to mine, because that's how the gallery process lender funds. He forwarded everything. Explained it when I asked. The insurance company needed a single point of contact. He volunteered. Said it would reduce back and forth. Temporary. I nodded. The forms were short. The language dense. I initialed where he highlighted. The closeness came from utility. From him being there when something snagged. When a crate went missing between cities, he found it. When a journalist misquoted me, he corrected it gently before it published. He didn't tell me about either until after. One night after we closed up the studio, I noticed he'd replaced the lock on the supply cabinet. Same model. Same key. He handed it to me without comment. I didn't ask why. People started introducing him as my partner. He never corrected them. He didn't encourage it either. He let it sit until it felt accurate enough to stop noticing. The first time I hesitated was small. A collector wanted to place a hold without committing. He advised against it. Said it slowed momentum. He was right. I let him handle the response. Later, when the collector circled back through him instead of me, it felt efficient. The gallery asked for updated documentation mid-run. Nothing dramatic. Just clarity around roles as the show traveled. He took the call while I was framing a new piece. Summarized it for me in 2 sentences. Said it was routine. That night, he brought dinner and spread paperwork on the table between us. Not thick. Not alarming. A continuation of things already in motion. He pointed out where my signature was needed to maintain consistency. To keep the pace. I signed without stopping what I was doing. After that, he started taking meetings I wasn't in. Still for me. Still about the work. He'd fill me in later when there was time. The studio felt quieter. More organized. Less like it belonged to me alone. When I asked if we were moving too fast, he smiled once and said we weren't moving. Things were just aligning. I believed him. The shift came disguised as relief. The traveling portion of the exhibition locked in faster than expected. 2 cities confirmed within the same week. Shipping schedules overlapped. Insurance riders stacked. I was already stretched thin, working on new pieces between packing lists and interviews. He stepped into the gap without ceremony. He didn't ask if I wanted him to. He told me what he'd already aligned. A consolidated account for exhibition expenses. Temporary. Cleaner for auditing. He said it like a technical courtesy, not a decision. The gallery preferred it. The insurer required it. It would all route back to me once the tour stabilized. He showed me the email thread. Names I recognized. Language that sounded final. I hesitated long enough for him to notice, not long enough to stop. He said I could read everything later. Right now, crates needed to move. Deposits needed to land. He said I trusted him. He didn't wait for me to say yes again. The authorization form was shorter than the last one. 1 page. Fewer boxes. My signature sat under language that didn't alarm me because it echoed things I'd already agreed to in fragments. Authority to receive and disburse funds on behalf of the project. Duration undefined. Revocable technically. With notice. I signed standing up. Canvas still wet behind me. After that, money stopped passing through my hands. Not in a dramatic way. I still saw numbers. Statements forwarded. Summaries delivered verbally while I was focused on other things. He never withheld information when I asked. He just organized it before I did. The studio became quieter. Fewer interruptions. Fewer decisions landing directly on me. When crates left, he confirmed. When they arrived, he checked condition reports. I stayed with the work. He traveled ahead of the pieces. Met with galleries before I did. Handled installation logistics. When I arrived, walls were ready. Labels printed. Payments settled. People deferred to him instinctively. He carried himself like someone already authorized. We were still close. Physically. Easily. He slept beside me when I was in town. Left early when I wasn't. He touched my back when I worked late, light pressure, then stepped away. He never asked for reassurance. He acted like it was assumed. There were absences I didn't question, dinners rescheduled, calls taken in stairwells, messages that said handled without elaboration. They felt like competence, not distance. The midpoint wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. A wire confirmation forwarded to me with a brief note. Exhibition revenue, first tranche, received and allocated per plan. I recognized the amount. I didn't recognize the destination account. It wasn't mine. When I asked, he said it was the consolidated account, the one we'd discussed. He said this was exactly why we'd set it up, to keep things moving. He said I didn't need to worry. I stopped asking questions after that, not because I didn't have them, but because everything kept working. Shows opened on time. Pieces sold. Press followed. My calendar stayed clear enough to work. The work got better. I told myself that was the point. I started noticing what was missing before I noticed what had changed. Invitations stopped coming to me directly. Not all of them. Just enough that my calendar looked cleaner than it should have. When I asked about a panel I'd expected to be on, he said it conflicted with install. When I asked which install, he said the one he'd already scheduled coverage for. It sounded responsible. The consolidated account became a presence without being visible. Expenses flowed through it. Advances landed and moved again. He showed me summaries when I asked, usually at the end of the day, when my attention was already thin. The numbers balanced. The work kept moving. We were still sleeping together, but it had lost its softness. He was often half awake, phone lighting his face in the dark. When I reached for him, he'd pull me close, then disengage gently, like he had something to finish. I flew to one of the tour cities alone. He said he'd meet me there. When I arrived, the gallery director greeted me warmly and asked if I'd had a chance to review the revised terms he and my partner had finalized. I didn't correct the word. I said not yet. She looked surprised, then recovered quickly. Said it was all very clean. Said I was lucky to have someone so organized. She asked me to confirm a detail I hadn't seen before. I deferred. Said he was better with that side of things. It felt easier than admitting I didn't know. At the hotel that night, I opened my laptop and searched my inbox for things I hadn't read. Threads I'd been copied on but hadn't opened because he'd summarized them. I read them now slowly. Nothing overt. Nothing wrong. Just a pattern of decisions already made, with me positioned as the beneficiary rather than the author. When he arrived the next day, installation was already underway. He kissed me lightly and handed me a coffee without asking what I wanted. He was right. It was what I usually ordered. He walked the space with the director while I adjusted a piece. They spoke in shorthand. Dates. Percentages. He nodded at the right moments. When I joined them, the conversation shifted to tone and lighting. The parts one was expected to care about. After the opening, someone congratulated him on securing the next venue. I hadn't known there was a next one yet. He caught my eye across the room and smiled, like it was a surprise he'd been saving. Later in the hotel room, I asked when he'd planned to tell me. He said he had been waiting for confirmation. He said it wasn't finalized until that afternoon. He said this was good news. I didn't argue. I asked where the contract was. He said he'd already signed the preliminary agreement to hold the dates. On my behalf. To avoid losing momentum. He said there was a clause allowing adjustment later. He said it was reversible. He said it the same way he always did. Calm. Certain. Like he was holding the whole shape of things so I didn't have to. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the consolidated account. Automated. Balance update. I didn't recognize the outgoing line item. A management fee. Modest. Percentage-based. Labeled interim. I forwarded it to him with a single question mark. He replied an hour later. Said it was standard. Said we talked about it. Said it was temporary. I couldn't remember that conversation. When I went back into my inbox to search for it, the thread wasn't there. I didn't press him about the fee. I let it sit the way I'd let other things sit. The work was still good. Better than it had been in years. Pieces sold before they landed. Requests came in through channels I didn't fully see anymore, but they came. The problem wasn't collapse. It was drift. I started hearing about decisions after they were implemented. A piece rerouted to a different city because it fit the space better. A loan extended without my input because it strengthened relationships. He told me these things the way someone reports weather. Informational. Neutral. When I pushed back gently, he listened. He didn't argue. He said he understood. Then he explained why the decision had already been made. By the time he finished, the window for changing it had closed. He traveled more without me. Said it didn't make sense for me to fly just to stand in rooms where nothing needed my presence. He sent photos. Install shots. Crowds. I responded with short messages and went back to the studio. The studio started to feel like a satellite instead of a center. One afternoon, a gallery assistant called me directly. Apologetic. Confused. She asked if I could confirm whether a piece was still available. Because my partner had already approved a hold, but she'd received a conflicting message from another collector. I told her to give me a moment. I called him. He didn't answer. I texted. He replied an hour later with a screenshot of the agreement. Time-stamped. Signed. Clean. I asked why I hadn't seen it. He said it had come in late. He said he'd planned to loop me in. He said it was aligned with what I'd wanted anyway. He used that phrase again. Aligned. That night, I logged into the consolidated account for the first time on my own. Not through a forwarded summary. Directly. The login worked. The layout was unfamiliar but readable. Money moved in patterns I hadn't approved individually but recognized collectively. Fees layered quietly. Not large enough to alarm. Regular enough to normalize. I scrolled back months. The first management fee appeared shortly after the authorization I'd signed standing up. It had grown incrementally since then. Not dramatically. Just enough. I closed the laptop without confronting him. The next morning, I found a calendar invite forwarded to me. Meeting with a new gallery. Scheduled for the following week. I hadn't been asked. The invite listed him as lead. I replied to the gallery directly and asked to reschedule so I could attend. The reply came from him before they answered. He said it wasn't necessary. He said he'd handle it. He said my presence wasn't required at this stage. That was the first time he said that. I went to the studio and worked until my hands hurt. When I came home, he wasn't there. His bag was gone. Not all of it. Just enough that I noticed. No note. No message. I checked my phone. Nothing new. The following day, a wire confirmation arrived. Another tranche of revenue. Larger this time. Deposited to the consolidated account. Allocated immediately. Portions labeled operational, management, reserve. My share was listed last. I forwarded it to him and asked when funds would be transferred to me. He replied with a single sentence. After the next cycle. I asked which cycle. He didn't answer. That evening, I received an automated notification from the gallery system. Change of primary contact confirmed. All future correspondence to be directed to him. I stared at the screen long enough for it to dim. Then I realized I didn't know when I'd last signed anything, or what I'd signed most recently, or whether there was anything left to revoke. The email came while I was in the studio, hands still dusty, phone face down on the work table. I didn't see it arrive. I saw it because the gallery assistant called 10 minutes later and asked if everything was okay. She said there had been a change. I asked what kind. She said representation. She said the paperwork had gone through that morning. She said all rights to negotiate, license, and place the work for the remainder of the tour had been assigned to my manager. She paused, then corrected herself. My former partner. I told her I didn't have a manager. She said she was sorry. She said the documents were very clear. When I opened the email, it was short. Formal. Attached PDF. No greeting. No explanation. Confirmation of assignment. Duration. Remainder of the tour and any extensions already under discussion. Revocation clause buried 3 pages in. Conditional. Notice period. Penalties. My signature was there. Not forged. Not altered. Mine. I sat on the studio floor and tried to remember signing it. I could remember the day. I could remember him bringing food. I could remember being tired and grateful and not wanting to interrupt the momentum. I could remember him saying it was just to keep things moving. I called him. It went to voicemail. I sent a message asking where he was. He replied an hour later. Said he was traveling. Said this wasn't the right time for an emotional conversation. Said everything was protected. Said I should trust the structure we built. I asked how long this lasted. He said we'd talk about it after the next opening. The gallery followed up with a calendar invite for a meeting. I wasn't required to attend. For my information only. He was listed as presenter. By the end of the day, 3 more emails came in. Licensing inquiries acknowledged. Loans approved. A publication request accepted. All addressed to him. All copied to me. I forwarded them to my attorney. She called me back and asked the same question again, slower this time. When did you sign this? I told her I didn't know. She said that was the problem. That night, I went home and opened my laptop and searched my inbox by date. I found the thread. Buried. Subject line bland. Language neutral. He'd explained it as continuity, as protection, as temporary. I'd replied with a single word. Okay, that was enough. The next morning, I received a payout notification. Smaller than expected. Labeled distribution. After fees. After reserves. After management. His management. I didn't message him again. 2 days later, the studio manager asked if I was moving out. He'd received instructions to coordinate access with someone else. He apologized for the confusion. Said it was probably temporary. I packed what I could carry. That evening, I saw photos from the next opening online. He was there, standing near my work, talking easily. The wall text listed him as representative. My name was unchanged. The work was unchanged. Only the access had shifted. The last message from him came a week later. 1 sentence. No greeting. This is bigger than us now. Please don't interfere. I didn't reply. The tour continued without me. The work traveled. I stayed where I was, with a studio that no longer received inquiries and an inbox that filled with copies instead of requests. When the final exhibition closed months later, I learned about it from a press recap someone forwarded by mistake. There was no mention of me attending. There was no mention of any conflict. Just a clean summary of a successful run. And a quote from him thanking the team for their trust.